Welcome to Train Signal. I'm Veronica Henry and you're watching Lab Setup. In this lesson, I'll start off with a look at my lab environment. This will help you understand the basic setup of my machine. We'll look at the hardware, software, and settings so that you get an initial idea of how your own lab environment might look. Then we'll talk about VirtualBox. This is the software from Oracle that allows you to set up what is called a virtual machine on your system. Then we'll go over how to create our very own Linux virtual machine. I have a very basic, but what I consider to be the most cool Toshiba satellite laptop. When my HP finally had to be put out to pasture, I researched long and hard, and having had a Toshiba before that lasted many years, that's where I decided to return. My laptop has a pretty standard Intel Core 2 Duo processor running at 2.10 GHz. I've got 4 GB of RAM and a 250 gig hard disk, along with a DVD drive. I use Linux almost exclusively, but for the times when I felt that I might need it, I decided to segment my hard drive and keep a copy of Windows Vista. So I dual boot this system using the Grub Boot Manager that we'll talk about in a later lesson. And with that, I select which operating system to run at startup. On the Windows side, I have Oracle's VirtualBox 3.2.8 installed, and through this program, I have two virtual machines, Fedora and Ubuntu Linux. Let's take a closer look at that setup next. Once again, Oracle VirtualBox is a virtualization software similar to VMware. This incredibly useful software allows you to create little virtual machines. They're fully functional environments with totally different operating systems than what you may have on your host system, which in our case is Windows. On my Linux box, I actually run copies of Linux Mint, Fedora 13, and Windows 7, all in virtual machines. And on the Windows half of my partition, again I run Fedora 13 and Ubuntu 10.04. You can run as many VMs as you want, and your only limitation is, of course, your system resources. And one of the good things about Linux is that it can run on very minimal resources. There are two versions of VirtualBox offered by Oracle. First, you have the closed source version, and then there's VirtualBox OSE, or the open source version. If you need USB support, you'll want to install the closed source version. All you need to do if you're on a Windows machine is to download the file from virtualbox.org and install the package as you would any other. Just double-click, sit back, click OK when you have to, and voila, it's done. On the Linux side, you can also download from the website, or you can install via the package manager. Full instructions are available at their website. Another thing that you'll want to do is to install the Guest Additions program. This add-on will provide better mouse integration and video support. Resizing virtual machine windows is a piece of cake with Virtual Additions installed. This little tool also provides for file sharing between your host system and your virtual machine guest. And finally, also gives you shared clipboard functionality, so that if you need to copy and paste between systems like I do regularly, this will be a lifesaver. On the next couple of slides, we'll take a look at my Fedora and Ubuntu virtual machine configurations. Then, just for fun, we'll install a virtual machine of our own. This snapshot shows you the settings for my Fedora 13 virtual machine. I've allocated 512 megabytes of base memory and told VirtualBox to use one processor. The system has several options to choose from which you want to boot. DVD or hard disk are a couple, and I've selected hard disk here. For my video settings, I've allocated 12 megabytes of video memory and enabled 3D acceleration. Though this isn't strictly needed unless you plan to do some really fancy things on your own VM. 2D video acceleration and remote display server are disabled. As for storage, I've set aside 32 megabytes of hard disk space and pretty much accepted the defaults for everything else. Now let's take a look at Ubuntu setup. For Ubuntu, we have 1024 megabytes of base memory, and I do notice this system runs just a bit faster than Fedora. Now, whether that can be attributed to the distribution or the memory is a matter for another debate. Again, this virtual machine, or VM, uses one processor and boots first from the hard disk. I have 32 megabytes of video memory allocated, and all other settings in this space are disabled. In terms of hard disk space, I have 32 megabytes, and again, the defaults for audio and network settings. Besides the base memory, things are relatively similar to the Fedora system. So for your own test Linux system, you would be fine with a small hard disk, say 10 gigabytes or so. You'd probably need just one processor, a minimum of 512 megabytes of video memory, though 1 gigabyte might be best. Of course, on production systems, you'll probably want to do a little bit better than the minimums. So, ready to create a virtual machine from scratch? Good, follow me. So hopefully you've downloaded and installed VirtualBox. The next piece that we need is the actual Fedora program. Now you download that program, and it's an ISO image format file from fedoraproject.org. Now make note of where you store the downloaded file, because you'll need that for the installation. If this were a fresh install, you'd copy that file to a DVD and reboot your computer to begin the installation. But since we're setting up a virtual machine, we'll use the ISO file. Now the process that we'll follow is to launch VirtualBox, then we click on New. And from there, we go through and select a virtual machine name, which can be any name that you like. Then we allocate memory and hard disk space, and we'll go over the defaults and how you can make changes to those settings. Then we'll start and select the ISO image, and we'll follow the prompts to install the product. From there, we'll install guest additions, and this portion is strictly optional. Our last step is to reboot and log into our new system. So let's go ahead and launch VirtualBox. Okay, so we have VirtualBox started, and as you can see, we have the two virtual machines that I've already set up for our test systems. But since we want to create a new one, let's just go ahead and click on New. And after the welcome screen, just click on Next. Now we enter a virtual machine name, and I'm just going to call it Fedora Test, or TST. Then make sure you select the correct operating system and the version, and select Next. From here, you select the amount of memory that you want to allocate to your VM. I'm going to accept the default of 512 megabytes, but if you wanted to make a change here, you could do so by entering a value in the box or using the bar that you see here to drag to a new setting. So let's click on Next. From here, we're going to select the hard disk image that's going to be used as the boot hard disk of the virtual machine. Now we can either create a new hard disk, which we will do, or use an existing one, and that would overwrite any of your existing settings. We don't want to do that. So I'm going to click on Next here. And this screen just says that the wizard will now launch to help us create a new virtual hard disk. So click on Next. On this screen, we select our hard disk storage type. You can either select Dynamic, which will grow and expand as your guest operating system uses more disk space, or you can select the fixed size storage. This is the option that I'm going to go with. This will stay the same size as whatever you set up initially. So click on Next. From here, you can select the locations of a file to store your hard disk data type. We already have that selected. And then you can select the size of your virtual hard disk. I'm going to keep the default of 8 gig, but again, you could either enter a new value here or use the bar to move to a new setting. So click on Next. And on the summary screen, we just see the items that we just selected, the type, the location, and the size. So let's go ahead and click on Finish. And we are now creating our new virtual hard disk. Now this will probably take about 2 minutes or so I'm going to pause here and we'll come back as soon as it's done. Now that that's finished, we have another summary screen which shows what we selected. The name of our new VM, the operating system, the base memory, and the hard disk. So let's click on Finish. And now that we have our new VM, let's go ahead and click on Start. And the dialog box pops up and tells us this is the first run wizard. So let's go ahead and click on Next. From here you select the installation media. I'm going to select the Fedora 16 ISO file and click on Next. You can read through the summary and go ahead and click on Finish. You can just click OK past this box, as it's just telling us something about the color settings, which we don't have to worry about right now. It'll take just a few moments for Fedora 13 to start, and it's going to start what's called the live system, which is sort of like a test system that you can run to try out the software before you do the actual install. But there will be an icon on our screen that we can click on to go ahead and do the real installation. Go ahead and click on Automatic Login. Click on Login. And when everything comes up, you can see that we are indeed using the live system user, and we have the icon that says Installed to Hard Drive. Let's go ahead and double click on that icon. This will launch the process to actually install Fedora. Let's click on Next at this screen. Select the appropriate language and click Next. Going to accept the default of the basic storage device and click Next. From here, select the hard drive that you'd like to install the operating system on. And this is our VirtualBox, the 8 gig VM that we set up just a moment ago. And click on Next. This warning just says that we're going to have to erase everything that's on this hard disk, and we know that that's okay because this is a new one, and we can go ahead and select Reinitialize. From here, enter a name of the computer, and that can be any name you like. I'm going to also call this one Fedora TST. Click Next. From here, you would select the appropriate time zone from the drop-down list. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as New York. And on this screen, you'll have to enter your root password. Again, this should be something secure, but for testing purposes, I'm just going to enter something here. And then confirm. And click Next. Now, the system tells me that I have used the weak password, and that's okay. I'm going to use it anyway. But if you want, you can use a really strong password with numbers and letters, uppercase, lowercase, things like that. And on this screen, again, I'm going to keep the default that says replace the existing Linux system. And click Next. And again, this is just a warning that says the partitions you've selected will now be written. Any data that you have is going to be wiped out, and we know that we don't have any data on our new disk, so we can just click on Write Changes to Disk. And it'll go through the process of formatting and creating the new system. And we'll pause here and come back as soon as that's done. Now that everything has been formatted, the system is copying the image to the hard disk. Again, this will probably take a couple minutes, so we'll pause and come back when it's complete. Okay, now that the installation is done, let's go ahead and click Close, and we'll need to reboot our system. So click on System and Shut Down. And shut down again. And when the system shuts down, we'll take a look at the settings in the VirtualBox system. Okay, if you click on Settings and take a look at the System tab. If you concentrate on the boot order, you'll see that we have floppy, CD-ROM, and hard disk. What we want now that we have the system installed is to select hard disk. So let's click on that and first move it to the top. And actually what we can do is uncheck floppy and CD-ROM since we won't need those. The other thing to note here is that you can change your settings. If you don't like what you set up initially, you can enter a new value here, and you can do the same thing for the display settings. Okay, let's go ahead and click on OK. And now let's go ahead and start the system again. I'll pause here and we'll take a look at the new system once it's booted. Okay, and here we are at the welcome screen. So let's go ahead and click on Forward. You can read through the license information and click on Forward again. From here we're going to create a new user. Again, you can call this user anything you want. I'm just going to create a user called V. Henry. You can fill in the additional information, the full name, and the password. And click on Forward. Now I got another warning here about my password, but I'm going to go ahead and use it anyway. From here you can select the date and time, and usually the default is correct, but if you need to make changes you can do so here and click on Forward. The hardware profile information screen that you see here just says that if you submit your profile to the community, this is a way to help them in looking at popular hardware and platforms, things like that. Submissions are anonymous, so if you want to send your profile, you can click on Send, but I'm going to leave it on Do Not Send. Click on Finish and just confirm. Then our new system should boot up. We'll go ahead and log in. Again, using the new user password that we just created. And click on Login or hit Enter. Now the last step in this process is to install the guest editions. And again, this part is optional, but we'll go ahead and do it just so you can see the steps involved. And as our new system boots up, you can see the username here in the right-hand corner. And the first thing that we're going to have to do is install a couple packages and some updates in order to install guest editions. So click on Applications, System Tools, and Terminal. Now the commands are going to look a little strange, so don't worry about them. We'll certainly get into these in more detail in later lessons. For now, in order to install the packages, we're going to need root privileges. And if you recall, we created a root password during the first part of the process. So I'm going to type in SU and that root password and hit Enter. And now we have root privileges. The first command is yum space -y space update space kernel and hit Enter. And again, this will take a few moments, so we'll pause and come back when complete. Okay, now that that command is complete, we just have one more. And this is a long one, so let's just bear with me. We'll type in yum space -y space install space kernel -devel space kernel -headers space dkms space gcc space gcc -c++. So again, we have yum-y space install space kernel -devel space kernel -headers space dkms space gcc space gcc-c++. Let's go ahead and hit Enter. And we'll let this installation process go through as well. And once that's done, we'll come back. Okay, so our second package has installed successfully. Now we can type in exit to exit from root, and then exit again to exit the terminal. And we need to restart our system. So click on System, shut down, and restart. Okay, let's go ahead and log in. And there are two more things that we have to do, one of which I'm sorry to say will require yet another reboot. Okay, now that the system is back up, click on Device, and then click on Install Guest Additions. And you can see the icon is now on the screen. Okay, so we're going to have to go ahead and restart one more time. So click on System, Shut Down, Restart, and we'll come back again at the login screen. Okay, our system has rebooted and we're back at the login screen. So we'll go ahead and enter our password and hit enter. And luckily there's just one more thing that we need to do to have guest additions installed. Okay, we're going to need to open up a terminal again and log in as root. Let's go to Applications, System Tools, and Terminal. I'm going to log in as root. The SU command, and then by entering your password. Now we're going to need to move to the media directory. I'm going to do that by typing in CD / media. Now I'm going to look at the contents of the directory, and these are all commands that you'll learn a little bit later, but we'll type in ls. We're going to change into that directory next, and it's a long name, so let's type in CD space vbox additions in all caps underscore 3.2.8 underscore 64453. So we've got vbox additions underscore 3.2.8 underscore 64453. Then we're going to hit enter. I'm going to take a look at the directory listing again with ls. Okay. Now we're going to type in sh space vbox linux additions dash x86.run. So we've got sh vbox, we've got the V and the B capitalized, the L capitalized, and the A dash x86.run, and hit enter. It's going to launch the VirtualBox installer, and this will take just a moment. Okay, now that that's complete, as you can see here, it tells you that you're going to need to restart the system in order to enable guest additions. Let's go ahead and type in exit once to exit from root, and exit again to leave the terminal. Now if you click on machine here, you can see that the seamless mode option is grayed out. I'm going to go ahead and reboot one more time so that you can see that that option will be enabled. So I'm going to reboot the system, and I will join you back here in just a minute. Okay, I've rebooted the system and logged back in, and now if we click on machine, we can see that enable seamless mode is now an option. It says to start seamless mode, you click on the host key plus L, and the host key again is control, usually the right control key. Now once you enter seamless mode, the screen will actually fill the entire size of your monitor, and what you can do from there is play around with the settings of the monitor size under System, Preferences, and Monitors. Okay, let's head back to the presentation. Hopefully now you have your lab environment installed and ready to go. Where theoretically, if you have a few extra machines laying around, you could easily network them to go through the course, but virtual machines are a great way to mirror a networked environment when hardware resources are a little tight. So in this lesson, we talked about my lab environment, essentially the specs on my system and how it's configured. Then we discussed how you can install and use VirtualBox to create many separate operating system installations, all on one machine. We reviewed how I currently have my Ubuntu and Fedora VMs configured. Then we walked through the process of setting up a new virtual machine. Now, with all this out of the way, I hope you'll join me on the core scenario video where I'll introduce you to Global Mantics.